Hello everyone, I am Giulio Prisco. I'm today in conversation with Tsvi Bisk. I hope I pronounced your name right, didn't I?
Yes, you have. Yes.
Thank you so much. Who has written a book, a very interesting one, called Cosmodeism. Could you perhaps show the book on screen? Ah, that's lovely. And also a very nice cover. And again, I like this book very much. Now, I have written a review which is going to appear on my website, turingchurch.com, together with the audio and video of this podcast. The video will also be on YouTube, so that you can read what I have to say about the book. And I want to focus this conversation on some specific points that grabbed my attention and made me think. But first, I'd like to ask Svi, can you say something about yourself, about your philosophy and your book?
My philosophy, I guess it's a philosophy of life. I'm a philosophical optimist. That doesn't
So am
mean
I.
I don't get depressed when I read the news and become melancholic for long periods of time. It just means that I've come to the conclusion that you can't do anything with pessimism. It's a useless frame of mind. It's a useless worldview.
I completely agree.
Life is meaningless. Okay, end of conversation. Let's go have a drink. You can't do anything with it. I think the primary human instinct, since human beings stood on their legs and looked up at the sky, is what does it all mean? It's a fundamental question that's the source of all religion, all philosophy, and I believe directly and indirectly, all science, entrepreneurship, art. It's the fundamental question that drives human creativity. When we create, we are in the image of God, in that God made cosmos out of chaos. By the way, he didn't create something out of nothing. If you read the Bible correctly, that's a whole separate discussion. And human beings make cosmos, order, out of chaos. We create things.
Can I interrupt you one moment?
Yes.
I think I understand to which passage of the Bible you are referring to, but can you just say it? Where does the Bible say that?
It's in the beginning. It's Genesis. It's in the
Right.
beginning, Everything was tohu vavohu. Everything was chaos. That doesn't say everything is nothing. Then the Spirit of God comes and creates order. Creates the stars, the heavens, the earth, the water, the animals.
Thank you.
But and of course the Eastern religions are much more sophisticated in that regard. But the question is, we're on this little planet around a very mediocre star in a very mid-sized galaxy, in a cosmos that might have trillions of galaxies, and not might be one, and probably is one, of a multi-cosmos. I prefer the term multi-cosmos to multiverse. I believe existence is infinite. Existence has always existed. Existence did not come into existence. I believe there's an infinite nature, that at a certain period of time created a local event we call the Big Bang, which created our particular cosmos, which is our home, as it were. But there is no beginning in which there is not something before. And there is no after which there's nothing after. It's just inconceivable. And of course, the hypothesis of a creative God doesn't solve the logical problem, because the religious people say, well, who created all this? As if the question then justifies belief in God. And they say if something exists, something had to create it, right? That's their argument. So I say, well, does God exist? Of course. Well, who created him? In Hebrew, we joke because in the Bible it says, Bereshit bara Elohim. Now it's translated that in the beginning, God created. But it could also be read, in the beginning created God. There is a beginning, a Tao, a T-A-O, an infinite abyss in which...
So it can be read as if there was a beginning that created God.
It was the beginning that created God, yeah.
Right, and I'm curious about that. Unfortunately, I don't speak Hebrew.
No.
My wife does, I don't.
You're lucky.
When you hear that sentence the very first time, what of the two meanings, what of the two possible meanings is the first one that comes to your mind?
The one that I make a joke about, because I like to laugh. I like to make jokes.
Yeah. And by the way, before I forget that, I think one of the points of your book that I appreciated more, which does resonate very, very deeply with my own philosophy, is that laughter is good. You say that laughter is better than meditation and better than prayer. I totally agree on that.
Because you are totally in the present. What is meditation trying to do? Get you in the present, stop thinking. When you're laughing, you're laughing. You're not doing anything else.
That's very true.
And I think if somebody asked me who's the best stand-up comedian in the world, I would say God. Look, he's joking all the time. I mean, if there is one, right? I use the term God like Einstein used it. It's this thing out there, that this force that we don't know what it is. Now, these are questions that we're never going to be able to answer, even when we reach a higher consciousness and a higher consciousness, etc., etc. But I believe it's very useful to speculate on them and to draw positive conclusions. I think one of the contributions my book can make is to mitigate somewhat the universal angst of modern civilization. We've never been better off as a species, and yet we've never been more dissatisfied. Now, some of that dissatisfaction is good. I believe dissatisfaction is good. I think being satisfied is not really good. But we don't enjoy our lives the way we should. It just... So I say, okay, let's look at the situation. We're alive. We know we're alive. We don't know why we're alive. We don't know what life is. We don't know what consciousness is. In the book, I speculate that the existence is multilingual, that there's more than one language, that mathematics doesn't describe everything, that there's might be a unique language for life, which we haven't discovered, because we know that all the constituent parts of life, but we don't know what makes something alive rather than not alive. And I believe there may be a separate language, a third language for consciousness, which we haven't. That's why I don't believe AI will ever become conscious. I ascribe to Roger Penrose's, in his book, The Emperor's New Mind, which he says that consciousness is not computable. It's not mathematizable.
I kind of disagree on that, but we will come to this point later. Yeah. But now, before going back to the thesis in your book, could you say something more about yourself and also about this very intriguing character that plays such an important role in the book? I hope I pronounce his name right. That would be Mordecai Nesiau.
Exactly. Very good. Yes.
How do you pronounce it?
Mordecai Nesiau. Very good.
Right. Okay. So can you tell us something more about yourself and about him?
Well, I was born in the United States, grew up in the United States. I was an American Jew. And I grew up in the 60s. I was in the American Army in the 60s during Vietnam. I won't go into detail there. I didn't go to Vietnam, and I left the week after I got out of the Army. I left. I hitchhiked around Europe. I hitchhiked around North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, which was very interesting for me, because I got rid of all the romantic nonsense of the 60s, of the authentic third world cultures, as opposed to the artificial Western culture, which is all plastic and everything. And I'll paraphrase Tolstoy on families. Every culture is screwed up in its own way. And even though Western culture is screwed up, I still prefer dentistry and toilet paper and all the good things that Western culture gives us. But that's a whole separate thing. And I landed in Israel the day before the 6-Day War, and I stayed, and this, that, the other. And about a year into being here, I ran into Nesiyahu, and we became friends. And he had developed this theory. He called it Cosmodeism. Which I changed the name for two reasons. I think deism reflects better a natural theology rather than theism, which is a supernatural theology. But the second reason is the word was co-opted by a neo-Nazi group in the United States, and they founded something called the Cosmodeistic Church, Aryan Brotherhood.
Does it still exist?
I don't know, but I didn't want to be associated in any way or form. What's interesting is that they stole some things that I had printed in an article previous to the book about Cosmo, and they used it in their philosophical explanation, not saying that this was written by a Jew, which is, I thought it was, you have to laugh at things like that. You can't get angry. And one day he says, I want to have a talk with you. He sits down and he starts to outline his cosmotheistic thesis. He had written this in the early 1950s, 50, 51. And he actually corresponded with Albert Einstein about it. He wrote a letter. Einstein wrote him back. He wrote another letter.
Was he a physicist or a philosopher or what?
No, he wasn't at the time when he wrote this, he was a Marxist, a Hegelian, leftist Hegelian, whatever. It was the 50s, and it was Israel, and Marxism was still a very big thing, and then he dropped it for 20 years. He says, I want to talk to you about this. I said, Mordechai, I didn't study philosophy and I didn't study physics. He said, yes, but you have an imagination. We had become friends and talked about a lot of things, very deep conversations. He was much older than me. Much older. He was in his late 40s. Much older. I was in my early 20s. And I asked him, after he explained this to me, I said, I don't understand. Why did you leave this in the drawer of your desk for 20 years and only pull it out now when you're talking to me? And he said, because when you have ideas like this and you have nobody to talk to, sometimes you think you're crazy. He would have been much more comfortable in our era, where there's a lot of ideas like that floating around. And then for 20, 30 years, we kept writing. He was like, if you know something about the Kabbalah, he was a tzimtzum. He would concentrate everything. He didn't have a capacious way of explaining things. And he wanted to get it down to sort of a singularity of logic. And I used to argue with him. I said, Mordechai, if you relate to some of the sources I related to, Hegel and Desjardins and, other people who were giving hints and intimations of this, you would make it more acceptable. He was very difficult to read. I mean, if you think Hegel and Kant are difficult to read, I mean, it's, that's a nursery rhymes compared to the way he wrote. It was like a haiku poem. Everything was like, boom.
His works have not been translated, have they?
No. Well, so I translated dozens of his things. I would work a year translating them. And then he'd say, I'd get angry all the time with him. We'd fight. Then he'd say, nah, it's not good enough. I have to rewrite it. This is after
awesome.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
If you ever come to Israel, I'll show you. I have a whole closet full of my translations of various versions of his stuff.
So would you say that your book, Cosmodeism, is the only description of Nessihau ideas in English?
Yes. Then he said, well, that'll be your job one day. Well, the one day took a long time because his son died very early at the age of 29, a tragedy.
Oh, man.
He became a little mental. He died a very sick man. I ran into financial trouble. I had to make a living, family trouble. I don't have to tell you, life interferes with a lot of things. And then about 20 years ago, I said, no, I've got to start doing this. And it took me 10, 15 years to get the book written. Even though everything in the book, the fundamentals were already there. But as you know, when you start writing, you discover new things too. So it's like, I thought it would take me a year or two to write the book, but I write and oh, this is interesting. Then you go off on another tangent, and this is interesting. And then you have to decide.
Perfectly well what you're talking about.
Perfectly. And then you have to decide what not to include.
Right.
And now I got the book published and I'm still reading and I go, oh my God, I could have included that. But it's never ending.
One thing that I do is to give myself very strict size limits for
Yes.
every chapters and also for a book. And I
Yeah.
tell myself, this chapter doesn't have to be longer than 4,000 words. And
Yeah.
if it becomes 4,001 words, that means you have to take something out.
Okay. I tried to do that, but some of my chapters are much longer than others because I have to face the idea, but I left a lot of stuff out,
Of course.
And but
Okay,
I
now
wanted the book,
I want to.
I wanted the book to be, you have these movies on Netflix, dystopia.
Yeah.
This is dystopia. This is dystopia. This is bad. We're ruining this. A civilization cannot flourish with declining self-confidence and declining self-esteem. And the
It's
West
very
has
true.
fallen into a garbage pit
Exactly.
of negative self-criticism.
Exactly.
Not critical, positive self-criticism. And I despise it. I'm tired of it. What good does it do to make people feel bad when they don't have to? We are in the process of solving our problems. We're in the process of solving our environmental problems through technology. And by the way, I think AI will contribute in ways we can't even imagine to solving these environmental and material problems amazingly.
Not only
Anyway,
I agree with you, but I really enthusiastically agree with you. That's one of the things that I usually say. Now, I want to ask you a question. What do you think Mordecai would say about your book if he could read it?
well, he would like the fact that I did it. And then some of the idiosyncratic additions that I added to it, he might argue with, because he tried to keep very strictly within scientific what is known. And I let myself speculate a bit. Like when I speculate on, well, the multilingual thing he would have agreed with, I think. He said, why do you have to include this? And why do you have to include that? What is this critique of postmodernism? And he wouldn't have gotten that at all. He was one of these, Professor Berlin's The Hedgehog and the Fox, his famous Isaiah Berlin. It's a very small book. He says there's two kinds of minds. There's the hedgehog that knows one great idea.
Yes.
And there's the fox that knows many ideas. Mordecai was a hedgehog. I'm a fox. So there's a problem there,
The
he was like
application
focused.
of this in among physicists is that, for example, Einstein was a hedgehog and Richard Feynman was a fox.
Who?
Richard Feynman.
Yeah. He was also funny, which is important. Yes.
Now, in fact, there are things that I would like to discuss first about science and then about philosophy, theology, and between brackets, religion. But first, can I ask you to give your very short summary, maybe 30 seconds, of the central idea of the book?
That the emergence of consciousness is an evolutionary development. That evolution is the Holy Spirit, if you will, the Holy Ghost of existence. It's what drives existence. And there is no end to evolution. So our consciousness is not the end of the development of consciousness. either we will evolve into a supra consciousness, or other conscious beings have already done so throughout the cosmos, throughout our galaxy, and then a supra consciousness, and so on, until a consciousness will have evolved that would have appeared to us as if it were God. It will become pure spirit. Consciousness will be able to survive without the organic body. We're talking billions and billions. But consciousness does not have a virgin birth. It didn't emerge with human beings. That the lower animals have a beginning of consciousness, and the lower animals have a beginnings, and so on and so on. In other words, I would be identified as a what they call a what's it called? The panpsychist.
Yes.
That consciousness is an inherent part of existence. And life is an inherent part of existence. Life did not come into being. It appeared on our planet. But life and consciousness are as inherent a part of existence as physics. Just as there's the space-time continuum, I would say there's a life consciousness continuum, which we are not nowhere near beginning to even approach understanding. We still have so much to discover in the space-time continuum, quantum physics, etc. But without those assumptions, those, I call them reasonable assumptions, it's hard to make sense of our existence. The mechanistic view is very useful. It's easily manipulated. It's easily mathematized. Well, not easily, but it's mathematizable. And it's for people who think of themselves as being hard-minded and not soft and wishy-washy. It's a very satisfactory way to live your life. But if you go into the deeper questions, you go, I'm not a physicist. I'm not even a philosopher, if I might say. I just ask questions and I try to answer them. And I try to answer them with my own logic. And then I go find other people who would maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe other people thought of this. And I find other people who thought of it in different ways. And that's what I tried to do in the book. That we are part of a continuum. What Nietzsche called, we're a chain in existence. We're not the end, thus spec Zarathustra, we're a chain. We're a link in the chain. And there's going to be a greater man, an overman, an Ubermensch, a supraman, not a superman, a supraman, something. We're just somewhere between the animals and what's going to come. And that's what we should strive for. You see it in Hegel in a wholly different way. He comes out of Nietzsche and Hegel, they're not in the same boat. They're like here and there. No. They're essentially talking about the same thing. That God emerges, Hegel says, God emerges in human history. What does that mean? If you're looking for it, you see it everywhere. You see it in science fiction. Arthur Clarke, Stapleton, which you mentioned in your review. Very fair review, by the way. Thank you. Even your criticism, we could talk about that.
In fact, not only you mention a lot of the thinkers that I really like Arthur Clarke and Olaf Stapledon and Thomas Nagel, but you quote exactly the same words that I like to quote about them. As we're saying, a really great book. I recommend this book to everyone.
Thank you very
Now,
much.
it's interesting that you make this difference between the cosmos and the universe, which is a
Yes.
difference that I also make, but I think I use the opposite terminology. In using your terminology, the universe, which you also call infinite reality,
Mm-hmm.
is everything that exists,
Mm-hmm.
while the cosmos is, the part of the universe that we live in, this local part of the universe that
It's
we
bounded.
exist
It
in,
has borders.
right?
We can define it. Define. We can put a fence around it.
Yes. And it's interesting that this is exactly what inflationary cosmology says.
Mm-hmm.
But you and Nassau have developed these ideas independently of Alan Guth, I believe, before the mid-80s, when the concept of multiverse and inflation were proposed.
Well, he didn't call it inflation, but he developed, he didn't call it the multiverse either. But he from a thought experiment and deductive logic in the 50s, he came up with this. You know, it was a total speculation. It was a thought experiment. And now science is caught up with it, you know.
In fact, I believe the parallels between what you write and what you can read in a textbook about inflationary cosmology, or also a popular exposition, are really impressive, because you are using different words
Yes.
with a different, but perhaps not that much, origin story to say exactly the same thing. At least it seems so to me. And another thing that I found interesting is that in this context, you criticize the Big Bang theory that you considered as a local event that gave rise to this specific cosmos that we live in. And you compare it to the steady state cosmology of Fred Hoyle. And I want to read one sentence that I really liked very much.
Okay.
And that would be, infinite nature is steady state, producing singularities ad infinitum, while our cosmos is a product of one of these singularities that resulted in our Big Bang. And this does make a lot of sense to me. And it seems to me as a vindication of the ideas of the really great man who was Fred Hoyle, whose idea, even if they do not strictly apply to the cosmos we live in, can still apply to the universe at large.
Yes.
Because you can read also inflationary cosmology in a sense that reminds very much of Fred Hoyle's ideas.
I also claim that, and Nassiau said, our cosmos might be the result of several Big Bangs that coalesced together and made just like, in a couple of billion years, the Andromeda galaxy might, collide with our galaxy, the other big, are gigantic black holes combining with one another and then blowing up again. Yeah, the fundamental thing is not the explanation, which could be several explanations, is that existence has always existed. It's infinite in space and time. And there's nothing before existence. Existence did not come into existence. So if you accept that as a logical assumption, then where did our cosmos come from? Our cosmos was born out of that existence. And our cosmos is finite existence. We know that. When, one day our cosmos will like evaporate into, trillions of years from now or whatever. But these things are going on continually. Now, we have no way of knowing, and we will never know, empirically, definitely not, but even with mathematical speculation, anything beyond our own cosmos. But it's a big enough playground to keep us happy for a while.
Right. I would prefer perhaps to say that in a slightly different way, which would be that even if we could acquire knowledge about something which we don't see as belonging to our cosmos at this moment, well, at that point we would just include that other place in our definition of cosmos.
Exactly.
Still defining the cosmos as the region, the part of the universe that we can experience.
That's very good. I like that very much. That's very good. Yes. The minute we know something about it, it's part of our cosmos. Yes. It's very good. Yes, yes.
I want to correct something that I said before, which was not really correct, which is that the inflationary cosmology that reminds of your theory is not the version originally formulated by Alan Guth in the 80s, but is the slightly later version of Andrei Linde that is called eternal inflation, because in that version you have one event, one inflationary event that started our universe, but you still have eternal inflation going on in places that are not within our cosmos, and new cosmoses keep being produced, which is what you say in your book.
That's the steady state theory of Hoyle.
And is also the inflationary cosmology of Linde.
Yeah.
Who doesn't use the term steady state, but as we were saying, the two ideas seem very much related to me. And you also mentioned this other interesting cosmological idea called plasma cosmology, which doesn't have too good of a reputation at this moment, I'm afraid, even if some of what they say do seem to make sense. Could you explain the flavor of that, perhaps?
I just mentioned plasma, and there was 2 or 3 other alternatives to the Big Bang as a way of saying, look, sometimes we can be trapped in our thinking by mainstream consensus-based science. And I just listed plasma, and I have no expertise in either any of those things, but they were advocated by serious people.
Yes.
And they had
a Nobel Prize.
Nobel Prize. Hannes, is that his name?
Alphen. Hannes Alphen.
Yeah. And it was popularized by a fellow by the name of Lerner in a book called The Big Bang Never Happened. Very interesting book. A bit polemic, but okay.
Polemic is good.
Yeah, nothing wrong.
I like polemic.
Yeah, well, you're Italian. So. I just mentioned it because we get trapped by naming things. For example, the fact that we gave the things that we don't understand names like dark matter and dark energy is very dangerous. It limits what we're looking for. I offered a different explanation that was totally from Mordechai Nesiyahu. That there's no smallness that there's not going to be smaller, and no largeness that's not going to be larger, and particles are constantly breaking up into smaller particles, which you haven't discovered and which ad infinitum. And that this process is what's causing the expansion of the cosmos, ongoing expansion, one argument, and that the particles are so small that they don't reflect light, but they still have aggregate mass, etc. It's an explanation. It's a guess. But it's like you're not supposed to give God a name. And you don't give God a name, because the minute you give something a name, you define it, you limit it. And when you limit it, you limit your ability to speculate and search for something else. And that's why I mentioned the alternative theories, because I wrote, I thought it was an amusing sentence, so I say so myself, that scientists are not God. Of course, some scientists think they're God, but that's a pathology. That's not a factum, There's a certain inherent arrogance, justifiable, in the scientific community about the superiority of science over every other way of thinking. But I think they got to get back to the fact that thinking outside of science is not mutually exclusive with thinking within science. You can get inspiration from some of the old religions. You can get inspiration from some of the old philosophies. Wisdom is eternal. Hebrew is an interesting language. Mordechai once told me, Nesiyahu, he was describing a professor. He said he's very intelligent, but he's very stupid. I went, now in Hebrew, hu me'od intelligenti aval me'od tipesh. Intelligenti is intelligent, and tipesh is stupid. So how's that possible? He said, well, look, in Hebrew, there's no word for intelligence. There's a word for knowledge, binah. There's stupid in Hebrew is the opposite of wise, not the opposite of intelligent. I said, wow, that put my whole university experience in perspective. Because, you have these professors who have to be unbelievably intelligent, and sometimes they say the stupidest things, and you go, what are they talking about? Do they live in the real world? And I think scientists have to understand that they can be inspired by, the great scientists do, by the way, the Einsteins, the Oppenheimers, they are inspired by literature and theology and poetry, yes, and religion, and there are scientists who are mechanics, and there are scientists who are great engineers. Most scientists are mechanics. They manipulate things. But to be a great thinker, you have to be able to open yourself up to other things.
Yes.
I think in a way, my ignorance of a lot of the science and my ignorance of a lot of philosophy actually helped me write the book, in the sense that I was coming across these things the way a child comes across them, wide-eyed, and wow.
And that is the best way to learn.
Wow. I didn't try to be sophisticated. I wasn't trying to impress anybody with my great knowledge. I think I was very honest in the book in saying, this said this. Where I said something, I put it in italics, say, okay, that's me, accuse me of this. But you're allowed to take educated guesses. The great breakthroughs are from educated guesses. Sometimes ignorant guesses. You go, that can't be.
You just said so many things that I really entirely agree with.
Yeah. Good.
Really so. Now, before moving to theology and all that, there was one other point about science.
Yeah.
That I wanted to discuss. When you explain, but not really explain, when you speculate about how it can happen that the cosmos is creating a god, you hint at new physics that we might discover. You even use the expression a new cosmological / biological law. At the same time, while this section of your book gives the impression of being open-minded about future scientific developments that could lead to a science entirely different from today's science, you also say things like that no civilization in the universe, no matter of how advanced they are, could be ever able to communicate faster than the speed of light, which, yes, it is the current scientific consensus.
I've changed my mind.
But perhaps is not as set in stone as some people think. For example, you do have hints in quantum physics that something between brackets, I not describe it, but something which is not limited by the speed of light is going on behind the scenes.
I'm writing a science fiction
I want to read that as soon
short
as it comes
story
out.
now, where I speculate what I call meta entanglement, in which people that are like 80,000 light years away can communicate in real time because they have the mechanics. There's quantum mechanics, there's Einsteinian mechanics, there's I call it meta entanglement in mechanics. Because we know that electrons is entanglement, right? We know all this. And they have managed to send holograms and speak to one another through holograms, not physically. And that is the way that conscious civilizations will eventually communicate across the vastness of space. And by definition, that's not faster than light. That's not light. Well, light at the speed of light, there is no time. So light itself is. Anyway, I'm getting off the. But I call it meta entanglement. So I think I was wrong there. I think we will be able to do it, but it will not be through spaceships that go through wormholes and things like that. Mm-hmm. It'll be through communication. The communication is the information. The transfer of information is the ultimate basis of existence.
Right, but at the same time, you're familiar with the concept of mind uploading. And, if I can replicate the entire content of my mind and consciousness in a way that can be sent as electronic communication, then I could use this meta-entanglement to send myself to the stars. And that would be something halfway between communication and actually traveling there. I do like this idea very much, and you just let me know when you publish your science fiction book. I want to be the first one who buys it. So you are saying that now you do not agree with this statement that you have in the book that advanced civilization would not be able to communicate faster than the speed of light. You're saying that yes, perhaps they could.
Yes,
is this correct?
We know that there are things that are not limited by this, that are not. It's not faster than the speed of light. They're not limited by the speed of light. Entanglement is beyond that concept. Entanglement is not faster than the speed of light. It's a whole separate thing going on in the cosmos. Now, we know that there is entanglement, right? we know that empirically, right?
Yes.
And the mathematics works and everything. So I'm like, okay, a very advanced civilization that has reached super consciousness, still has a body and everything, very well might have, tamed the concept of entanglement, just like we've tamed quantum physics.
Right.
That's how we're talking. We wouldn't be talking if we hadn't tamed quantum physics. So.
The consensus at this moment among physicists is, something halfway between. It is that, yes, entanglement is real, is mathematically real, and it has been confirmed by experiment. So nobody is saying that entanglement is not real, but there are some theorems that says that yes, there is entanglement, but you cannot use entanglement to communicate faster than light. This is the consensus at this moment, but I'd like to add this magic word yet. Entanglement cannot be used yet to communicate faster than light.
See, that's when you go back to David Hume 250, 300 years ago.
Not yet. As a matter of fact, the mathematics of the demonstration that you cannot use entanglement to communicate faster than light seems solid, but it seems solid in the light of the understanding of quantum physics that we have at this moment. And I just cannot believe that we, at the beginning of the 21st century, have already found out all that there is to find out. I believe science will give us many more surprises.
We're in our diapers.
Exactly.
We're in our diapers.
Exactly.
We're babies. I call it the paradox of knowledge. Whereas Newton thought that one day we would know everything about everything. I think it was even Kelvin or somebody in the 19th century physics has been, no, it wasn't, it was Maxwell, I think. We've solved all the problems of physics. Now it's just...
No, Maxwell would never have said that. It was Kelvin in the...
Kelvin?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And the fun thing is that he said that a couple of months before a meeting in Berlin where Max Planck, made his first announcement of what was to become quantum theory.
Yeah.
But we are really in our diapers, as you said.
And I think your idea of your own brain, your own spirit as an individual, being able to travel to the stars, which is that's a good subject for a science fiction book too, by the way. See, science fiction can serve a real useful function in advancing human thought by writing this stuff and showing this stuff before the scientists get to it.
Exactly.
And scientists read these things. I mean, but I think that would happen if we discover the language for consciousness. Because we don't know what consciousness is. So it's hard to describe it. And Penrose says you can't mathematize consciousness. He wrote I've got the book here, The Emperor's New Mind. Great book.
That was a great book indeed, and also all the rest that Penrose has written. But I think on this very point he is wrong, because he just demonstrated that we cannot replicate consciousness on the kind of machines that we know how to build now, but this doesn't rule out the fact that consciousness could not be replicated, on some other kind of machines that we don't know yet how to build. But maybe. In general, I think even that would be too restrictive, in the sense that what I think now is that Penrose was just wrong. And that also applies to consciousness in the kind of digital computers that we can build today. in the sense that perhaps not ChatGPT 5, but ChatGPT 11 could well have conscious experiences. But these things are the things that I explore in my books, and we are here now to talk about your book. So that let's discuss this another time, and I want to
Okay.
move on to the theological implication of your work. But
Okay.
first, I have to go and switch off the phone alarm of my wife that is telling her that he must take her medicine, but she's not here. So I just have to switch that thing off. Just 1 minute.
Take your time. Well, you know that, by the way, just one last word on that. Nasiao used the term a new mathematics, a mathematics that can describe qualitative change rather than just quantitative. Yeah. So we'll leave that subject alone. That's for.
Yeah, and I think Nasiau's new mathematics must be exactly what I call irrational mechanics. And I think I sent you my book of the same title, but let's have that discussion another time if you care to read
Absolutely
my book. So you say that you do not want to create a new religion with Cosmodeism.
I'm scared
but you hope that Cosmodeism or some elements of Cosmodeism could be assimilated into religions like Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Eastern religions. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you say that you are scared to create a new religion instead. Why?
Well, then you become a guru and people get enthusiastic and it becomes a cult, and I don't. First of all, I don't have the energy. Number one. Number two, why throw out the baby with the bathwater? The legacy religions, for all their historical evil, let's get that out of the way, have developed systems of wisdom and social behavior and traditions and stories that are the very essence of the human experience. They are what we are.
Yes.
And,
By the way, I forgot asking you this question. Do you consider yourself a Jew? Do you go to the synagogue and take part in the life of the community?
No. I'm an ethnic Jew. I'm not a religious Jew.
Right.
Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. Jews are an ethnic group. And Judaism, the Jewish identity has evolved through the ages. I mean, you have, the fathers, you have the judges, the kings, the rabbis, then you have the Middle Ages, you have Enlightenment Jewry, conservative reform, then you have secular Jews. Jewish identity has evolved. By the way, all identities evolve. I use the example of England. I mean, England today is similar to the England of Alfred the Great or Richard the Great or Richard the Lionhearted or Elizabeth I or Queen Victoria. I joke in the book that modern English identity was created by a German queen and an Italian Jewish prime minister. Victoria was German and Disraeli was an Italian Jew. That's the England we think, from time immemorial. No, it's an invention. But we I'm not a cosmopolitan.
Sorry, you're not a what?
Cosmopolitan.
Right.
I believe we need tribal identities.
So do I.
Mazzini was the great cultural nationalist. And in a way, he's my hero, Mazzini.
Giuseppe Mazzini is your hero.
Yeah, Mazzini is brilliant. I mean, he Italy, in civilized intercourse with other nations and nation states, each contributing what they can contribute. I liken it to ecology.
Yeah.
If you have a field with only one species in it, or a forest with only one species of trees, that's not a robust ecology.
Exactly.
One disease comes and wipes it out. What's a robust ecology? An ever-growing number of species and subspecies interacting with each other and challenging one another and strengthening one another. That's strength.
Yes. And I have to make this noise loud. Because, well, I didn't really want to go into politics in this conversation, but this is exactly the reason why so many of us in Europe do not like at all what the European Union is becoming. Yes. We want a Europe of independent nations that collaborate. We don't want a central government, and we do not want
it won't be Europe.
Exactly.
It won't be Europe. Europe is this crazy combination. Now,
exactly. And it must remain so.
The European Union did one thing. It ended European wars until Putin came along. And if it only did that, it has its place in the world to come. But it also created the highest standard of living in the history of Europe. So it's done two things. It absorbed, and the third thing it did was it absorbed 3 fascist countries, Spain, Portugal, and Greece, and a dozen communist countries. And to one degree or another, perfectly, imperfectly, they're functioning parliamentary democracies to one degree or another. Some are, you live in Hungary now, so it's problematic, whatever. But it's an amazing achievement. Leave it alone. The French are French, the Germans are German, the Dutch are Dutch,
and the
Spaniards are, the Italians are Italian. And you know something? The Northern Italians are Northern Italian, the Neapolitans are Neapolitan, the Sicilians are Sicilian. Leave people alone. Let them have their own craziness. It's good.
It is good.
Just don't kill one another.
Right. Exactly. Exactly what you said. But
if everybody's alike, it is so boring. The human race would die of boredom. And what would happen to languages? I mean, I hear people talk about, languages are disappearing around the world. So they took, linguicide. It's terrible. We have to. And these are the same people that are against nationalism. I use the phrase nationism. In Hebrew, we say lumiyut, which is nationism, and luminut, which is nationalism, which is more, nationalistic. Nationism is you love the rhythms of your society, the taste of your food, the smells, the jokes, the hidden knowledge. When Italians talk to Italians, I'm sure people that are not Italian don't even know what you're talking about, even if they understand Italian. When Jews talk to Jews, we're talking, it could be in English, we're talking a language and we get one another and it's fun.
I think I am very much of a nationalist myself. Huh?
Yeah.
No, I have lived in many places.
What?
I have lived in many places.
Yes.
And I love all these places. And I can identify with the ethnicity and culture of all these places. So I
Yes.
use to say that I am a nationalist without a nation, but perhaps now I could change to I'm a nationist without a nation, because the concept makes a lot of sense to me, really a lot of sense. But let's not dive too deep into
Digress.
politics,
Yeah, go ahead.
and let's go back to theology and religion. And I want to come to my main criticism of your book, which is very much related to what we were saying like 20 minutes ago about scientific imagination and the fact that the real laws of nature can be much, but much, much, much more complex than we understand now. Now, you said that you want believers in traditional religions to assimilate cosmodeist ideas. But it seems to me that, if you want to change someone's mind on something as important as this, then you must offer them something better than what they have. Or at least you should not take away from them something good that they already have. Now, it seems to me that in all these religions that we have been discussing, there is a very important and very appealing concept that keeps people in, and it is the concept of the afterlife. You have different concepts of afterlife, well, perhaps not that different in different religions, but you always have the central idea that somehow your consciousness will continue to exist, and you will be in some way still together with the people you love. And I have always thought that, that is really the reason why people invented religion, because, we don't want to cope with the heartache of knowing that is not so. Now, I have the impression that if you want your ideas to really reach the masses, you should offer some form, at least, of the concept of afterlife. And as a matter of fact, in the book, you do make an effort to do just that. When you say that we do not disappear from the universe, we continue to exist within the universe, because, and I'm reading now, consciousness might be some kind of energy or coherence that cannot be destroyed and survives in a different form in the universe. This is in the cosmos, sorry. This is a very Eastern concept of afterlife. But you also say explicitly that even in this case, we would not retain our individual identities after death. And with this declaration, it seems to me that you are really taking away from people one thing that they desperately want to have. And I think that can reduce the appeal of
I can't say
your
something
ideas.
I can't say something that I don't believe in. Just because it would be popular. I mean, what I do say, it's a little more complicated than the way you read it. We don't know what consciousness is. Now, if it's energy, well, energy we know from classical physics can't be destroyed. If it's information, we know from quantum physics that can't be destroyed. So our consciousness as a thing that exists does not de-exist, just like our body changes, but everything still exists. The iron in our blood exists, and the potassium and the calcium and the this and the that, and in a different form. I just think that if there is a life consciousness continuum, our consciousness gets subsumed into that continuum as part of a greater collective consciousness of the consciousness is of the cosmos. You're right, that is more Eastern than monotheistic, even though it's not Eastern either. But I think it'd be easier for a Hindu or a Buddhist to accept it. And by the way, I think my book might become, if it's ever translated, might become more popular in places like India and Japan and China than in Europe or America. But I don't know. I can't afford to get it translated, and I can't find publishers that are willing to do it. So, but I'm not so sure that it's less attractive that your very being is going to be subsumed into a greater being that has a greater meaning. Then you're still going to walk around on some cloud with wings and still be Julio. And
I think it is attractive in an intellectual sense.
yeah,
it is attractive in a philosophical sense. It's not
You're
so
right.
attractive in a personal sense.
You're right. I
So,
can't argue with you.
The question I asked myself.
This is an idea that I'm sure if other people take it, if you take it, and other people take it, they'll make it different, and that's okay. There'll be,
Yeah, and
there are Hegelians and there are neo-Hegelians. Like.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do have my own spin of that idea on which I do not disagree. And can even manage to find it appealing at times. But I ask myself, and I do dedicate a lot of my time to finding ways it could be so. I ask myself if among those things that we do not understand yet about how infinite reality and even our own cosmos work, there could be something that enables the concept of personal afterlife. And I think I have found some, and I do dedicate some time to popularizing them. But again, that would be a discussion about my book, not about yours. We are here to discuss yours. I look forward to have another discussion, perhaps to discuss mine.
Absolutely.
But I want to come now to a couple of other points. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time in the world.
Go ahead.
And one would be, for example, this. You said at some point that, well, monotheistic religion have this idea that something creates the world from outside, which is philosophically problematic, because then you have to ask the question, what created that something? And if you answer something else, you'll have to ask the question of, who or what created that something else. But there are different ways of putting things, I believe. And one is this concept that you hint at when you quote Olaf Stapledon, saying that, and I'm going to read, perhaps God, who created all things in the beginning, is himself created by all things in the end. This is a very nice closed logical loop that eliminates the need for an infinite regress. And, you know, I think I can make sense of this concept, thinking that, well, you know, the universe evolves. It becomes, you have more and more powerful consciousnesses. At some point, they become indistinguishable from our point of view to what we could only call God. So that means they can do things, not only things that we do not know how to do, but also things that we can even begin to imagine could be done. And, you know, I do think that among these things, there is the possibility to influence things in the past. And here we go back to the discussion on quantum entanglement and faster than light. Not travel, but faster than light something, which implies the idea of somehow reaching back into time. So I think a way to make the concept of a God that exists at the end of time as logically close as possible would be exactly stapled on ideas. And spelling these ideas as I do spell it, the idea is that at some point, this super powerful consciousness that develops in the universe acquires the ability to influence the past of the universe, not necessarily between you know, explicit retrocausation, but perhaps more like closed, self-consistent temporal loops. This is also one of the ideas that is explored now and then in the science fiction literature, but don't you think that would be a nice addition to Cosmodeism?
Not by me, but
No?
but it would enrich the discussion about cosmotheism. It would contribute to cosmotheism, but I couldn't ascribe to that because I don't think entanglement is faster than light. I think entanglement is something different, which I don't have a word for. Because you're right, theoretically, if you go faster than light, because at the speed of light, there is no time, right? The speed of light, there is no time. So if you go faster than light, then time is going in reverse.
Right.
The time is going slow. Okay. Speed of light, time stops.
More like a consistent loop. You know, there is this example that is given.
No, I like it.
Suppose I go back in time and meet William Shakespeare and give Shakespeare my copy of Hamlet before he writes Hamlet. Then Shakespeare goes on to write Hamlet.
I love it.
That is exactly how I read Hamlet.
I think there are science fiction stories,
you know,
like that. I think
yeah, there was one, a very famous one written by Robert Heinlein. It's called All You Zombies, which people say is the only one which is entirely logically consistent, but is essentially this information paradox is a logical loop which doesn't fail anywhere. Why does Shakespeare write Hamlet? Because I gave it to him. Why do I have Hamlet? Because Shakespeare wrote it. The consistency is not broken anywhere.
Remember the movie Back to the Future?
Yes.
That happened. That kind of a thing happened.
But, you know, Heinlein's story is much better than that. It's much more logically
coherent
put together.
Yeah.
But, you know, I do look forward to changing your mind about some of these things. And I do look forward to having another conversation soon. I have really enjoyed this one.
I have. Can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure.
You live in Budapest?
I live in Budapest.
Okay, so maybe I'll visit you or you'll visit me. Who knows?
You're always, yeah, I have never been in Israel. Yeah, I have been in Israel for 5 minutes once by mistake. I was in Jordan. But I do look forward to go there. And if you happen to come to Budapest, I'd like very much to see you.
Okay.
If not, I'd like very much
Let's continue
having another Zoom conversation. So
Send me a copy. Send me a copy of your book. I don't.
I will. As a matter of fact, I did, but I'll send it to you again.
Okay.
You know, I enjoy talking to you, and I'm really sorry that I didn't get the chance of meeting Mordecai Nassau. That must have been a really fascinating character. Having said that, thank you very much, Tsvi. And once again, I want to encourage all viewers to read Cosmodeism.
Buy my book.
This book, yes, buy his book because it's a good book.
Yes, it is.
And thank you very much
Thank you very much.
for listening.
Bye-bye.